Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Introduction to PHP course. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about what are known as conditional control structures, in particular the if and else statements. And it's a very exciting lecture because for the first time we're going to be able to make some decisions within our code based on user inputs and user actions. So we're going to be able to evaluate certain sections of code based on things that happen from the user. In particular, we're going to first talk about what's known as statement groups. This is basically just, as the name implies, grouping a bunch of statements together, and they sort of get treated or evaluated as one. We're going to talk about obviously the topic of the lesson, conditional control structures, and in particular the two control structures known as the if statement and the else statement. We're also going to cover a language construct called isSet. And then we're going to go over coding conventions as they apply to if and else statements. So what is a statement group? Well, essentially, as the name implies, a statement group is a bunch of statements that are grouped together and sort of treated as one. When you evaluate a statement group, you evaluate all the statements within that group. So for example, in PHP, the way you denote a statement group is, let's say these two statements, you want them to be executed as a group. You surround them by opening and closing curly braces. What that does is, if this statement group right here is to get executed, that means that both of these echo statements will be executed. So both hello and world will be echoed out to your output. Now, conditional control structures, what they provide is the ability to execute statement groups on a conditional basis. And basically what they do is they test a condition, and if the condition is met, then a particular statement group is executed. For example, PHP provides a number of different control structures. There's the if-else statement, and then both of those we're going to be talking about today. There's also the if-else-if control structure and the switch control structure, which we're going to be talking about in a couple upcoming lessons. And then these control structures down here are conditional control structures that allow you to loop over a statement group and repeat it multiple times based on certain test conditions. And we'll be getting those as well later on in the course. The if control structure, commonly known as an if statement, is basically the most widely used conditional control structure. And it's called an if statement, although technically it's not a statement as far as PHP goes, but that's the common vernacular for referring to it. Basically what the if statement does is it tests a condition, which is a Boolean expression, and if the expression evaluates to true, then it executes a statement group associated with the if statement. So for example, this is the syntax that the if statement has, and basically what it has is the if keyword and then a test condition immediately following that in parentheses. And basically, if test condition equals true, then this statement group, which is all the statements enclosed in these opening and closing curly braces, will get executed. If the condition is false, then they don't get executed at all. One thing to note also is that it's another sort of terminology thing, is that one says when one refers to executing statements within an if statement, it's called being inside the if statement if this condition is true and you're executing statements within the if statements statement group. And that's just a terminology thing. One other thing to note about if statements is that if a statement group associated with an if statement has only one statement in it, in other words, it's a statement group consisting of one statement, you don't actually have to include the curly braces around it. And the single statement can just be output as is. So let's actually go and take a look at an example of the if statement in action. Here we have a script called if.php, and basically it's going to run through a couple of different examples of using the if statement. Make it a little bit bigger. Basically, in this first one, we use literal values as the test condition, and we say if true, then go ahead and execute the statement group. And so basically, as we just learned, if the if statement's test condition is true, then the statement group gets executed. Because true is always true, this statement right here will always be executed. Now, if we try the same thing but we put false as the test condition. False is always going to equal false, which is not true, which means that this statement block in here is never going to get executed. As another example of slightly different using an expression, we could say if 0 is less than 1, and that's a Boolean expression, it's a comparison operation. 0 is always going to be less than 1, so this test condition will always evaluate to true, and because of that, this statement within the this echo statement within the if statement group will always be executed. Now, one other thing to point out is that these examples up here used literal values within, or static values within the test condition, but more often than not, you're actually going to be using variables and combinations of variables, in particular variables using comparison operations as part of the if condition. So in this case, we have a variable called Boolean expression, just shortened EXPR. We set it equal to true, and then if we run the if statement with the variable Boolean expression as the test condition, what's going to happen is PHP is going to replace Boolean expression with its value, which is in this case is equal to true. Because it's equal to true, this statement here is going to get executed. As another example of things a little more complex, we could declare a variable called 1 and set it equal to the integer 1, and then we could put a comparison operation as the test condition, which is a Boolean expression, and we say if 1, or the value of the variable 1, is equal to the value of 3 minus 2, if that's true, then execute this statement here. And because 3 minus 2 is always equal to 1, this statement will get executed. And down here you can just see the results of these 4 different if statements that we had, or 5 different if statements. In the top one, because this was true, I will get executed, was printed out. However, because this test condition was false, I will not get executed, does not get printed out. And if we look down here, we see that's exactly what happened. I will get executed was printed out, but the other one wasn't. Because 0 is less than 1 is a true statement, is a true test condition, this is going to be echoed, and we can see 0 is less than 1. And then for the two, our final 2 if statements, because Boolean expression in the first one equals true and 1 is equal to 3 minus 2, both of their echo statements that are part of the if statement group get output. So one other control structure that we're going to introduce is known as an else statement. And like the if statement, it's not actually technically a statement in PHP, but that's how it's commonly referred to. It's a conditional control structure that basically gets associated with an if statement. And the way it works is that if you have an if statement and the if statement's test condition evaluates to false, and there's an else control structure that follows the if control structure, then whatever statements are inside the else statements group gets executed. And so, for example, the if-else sort of combination has this following syntax, where you have your if statement, as we had just described. It tests a condition. If the condition is true, it evaluates this statement group, and then it would actually proceed to the end of the code, or to the next line into the code. However, if condition equals false, because there's an else control structure associated with it, then whatever statements are in the else control structure statement group get executed. So every time this is false, these statements down here will get executed. And as with the if statement, if an else statement group only contains one particular statement, the curly braces around it can be omitted. They're optional. So let's take a look at an example of the if-else control structure in action. Here we have 2 simple if-else combinations. In the first one, we have an if statement that says, if this condition is true, then you're going to echo this statement here. And if it's false, this statement gets echoed. Because true, the literal value true is always true, this statement will always get executed. The else statement group will not be, and then any code that would be next down the line would get executed after this statement was echoed. Now, if we switch things around and we put the value false as the test condition, because if the test condition is going to equal false, then the if statement group will not get executed. However, there's an else statement group appended to the end of it, so the else statement group will get executed. So here it will say, now I will get executed. And if we look at the output of these 2 if-else control structures, we can see I will get executed was output from the first one, and now I will get executed was output from the second one. One other thing I want to talk about is something known as the isSet construct. And basically this is something that's useful for particularly processing get data to see that if data was actually passed to the script that you needed. For example, if you're expecting a name-value pair to a script via get where the name is, for example, action, and action is set equal to something like checkout. The isSet construct can be used to see if action was actually passed into the script by checking to see if that value exists, or excuse me, that key exists in the get array. And the way isSet works, get this out of the way here, is it checks two things. One, it checks if the variable that you pass to it has been previously declared, and also it checks that the value is not null. And the way it works is it accepts a variable as its argument, and it returns a Boolean value of true or false. So for example, if we declare a variable here, a, and we set it equal to 1, and then we run the isSet construct on the variable a, temp is going to be set to true. And the reason for that is because a has been both declared and its value is not equal to null. Now if we went down here and we changed the value of a so that it's equal to null, and we run the isSet statement on a again, or the isSet construct on a, temp is going to be equal to false. And that's because even though a was declared, its value was false. And then finally, if we run isSet on a variable b that has not been declared, let's assume this was all one script, because b has not been previously declared in this script, isSet is going to return false. So let's take a look at what that looks like again in action. We have a script called isSet.php, and basically what it does is, because isSet returns a Boolean value, we can use it within an if test condition. So basically this is saying if the variable name was passed to the script via get, which would imply that, which means that the underscore get array would contain a key value pair with the key name. If that's set, then we're going to echo these statements here. It says a name was provided by a get, and it's going to output the name. On the other hand, if it wasn't provided, then it's going to use the else statement to output, say the name was not provided by a get. And if you look up here at the top of our script, we can see we just have isSet.php with no get query string appended to it. So because there's no name as part of a get query, isSet on this that's checking the get variable name is going to return false. It's going to echo name was not provided by a get. Now if we were to go up here and add name, let's say I put my first name in here, Matthew, and enter the script, isSet is going to return true because the get variable name exists. And so it's going to output the if statement group, or it's going to evaluate the if statement group. So it's going to say name was provided by a get, the name provided was Matthew. And one other thing to do, just as sort of a refresher of going over how URLs are encoded. If we remember, spaces in URLs are encoded with a plus sign. So if I want to output my first and last name here, I can do Matthew plus Makaj. And if I do that, you can see that Matthew Makaj was output. And that, again, is just sort of a review of URL encoding. And the reason that the isSet is useful, like I said, is for checking get parameters, because if you try to access a get value that was not provided to the script, you'll get a warning. And also if you try to access, if you try to use get values that weren't passed in, your script's not going to work as executed. So for example, if we look at the code of isSet, now we're to go in there. And before I run this, well, actually after the else statement, let's say I go ahead and try to echo, move this over a little bit. And now we're trying to echo a get value for a get variable that doesn't exist. Let's call it last name. And if I try to echo that, because it's not passed into the script, if we go back and use the same query string as before, we're going to get a warning. And if we look down here and we refresh it, it's going to say, notice undefined index last name, which basically says that the key last name doesn't exist in the get array, and that's because we didn't provide it. So that's one of the main uses of the isSet construct, is to be able to check if get data was provided. Now I just want to talk about coding conventions as they apply to if statements and else statements. Basically, the examples we've seen are formatted the way that we're going to be formatting them in the class. Namely, first off, there'll always be a space between the if keyword and the opening parentheses of the test condition. And additionally, after the closing parentheses of the test condition, there'll be a space followed by the opening curly brace. So the curly brace for an if statement is always going to be on the same line as the if keyword and the if condition, and it's going to be one space after. Similarly, for an else statement, the opening curly brace for an else statement group is going to be the same line as the else keyword, and it's going to be separated by a space. Additionally, any statements within an if-else statement group are going to be indented one level deeper than the if keyword. So when we go back and we look at our example here, in this isSet example, we can see that all the statements within the if statement group and the echo statement group are one indent deeper than the if or else keywords. The other thing to note, as you can see in this script, is that the closing brace for an if or else statement group will always be on its own line, and it'll be indented the same level as the if or else keyword. And as far as the else statement goes, the else keyword will be on a new line following its corresponding if statement's closing brace. So for example, if we look back here, we can see the closing brace for this else's corresponding if statement is right here, so else is on the following line, as opposed to having else up here, which sometimes you see in different people's coding style. But for this course, we're going to be doing it like this. And then finally, even those statement blocks, if they contain one statement, don't have to have curly braces surrounding them, as we had mentioned. We're always going to surround our statement groups for if and else statements with curly braces, even if there's only one statement. So now I just want to talk about the homework challenge for this lesson. Basically, I want you to create a script that contains a single if-else control structure. And what it's going to do is it's going to test using the isSet function if the variable get ID is set. So it checks if the get parameter ID was supplied. If it was, it's going to if that's true that it was supplied, it's going to you should output the ID passed in, and if it's not true, you should output an error message stating that you need to provide an ID to the script. And what that's going to do is you should be able to make use of an if-else statement in order to do that, similar to what we had done in the isSet.php example in here. One thing I want to say is that I strongly encourage you to not cut and paste code from the lesson examples, and that you should practice typing these if-else statements on your own. And the reason for that is there's often a lot of mistakes involved with if-else statements and control structures in general, where you leave out a parentheses or a curly brace, and so the only way to really get practice with that and to learn where the mistakes are made and how to correct them is to get in there and sort of type it on your own. And also, I just want to mention that you should follow, when you write your sample script or homework script, that you should follow the coding conventions we just outlined for the if-else statements. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching educator.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.